There is a specific silence that falls over you in the middle of a crowded room. One moment, you are the life of the conversation, the listener, the shoulder to cry on. You are engaged, nodding, absorbing every nuance of tone and micro-expression from the person in front of you. You are practically vibrating with connection. And then, without warning, the switch flips. A sudden, visceral wave of exhaustion hits you like a physical blow. The noise of the room transforms from a hum into a screeching assault on your senses. The person speaking to you, someone you care about, suddenly feels like a vampire draining your last drop of blood. You don't just want to leave, you need to vanish. You go cold, your face goes slack. You retreat behind a glass wall where you can see them, but they can no longer reach you. Later, when you are finally alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the guilt sets in. You ask yourself the terrifying question that haunts every deeply sensitive person. Am I actually a monster? You wonder how you can be so loving one minute and so incredibly icy the next. You worry that your empathy is a fraud, a mask you wear to manipulate others, and that deep down you are actually hollow. I am here to tell you that you are asking the wrong question. This sudden coldness, this jarring detachment, is not a sign that you are broken. It is not a moral failing, and it is certainly not a lack of love. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the deepest trenches of the human soul, identified this phenomenon decades before modern neuroscience caught up. He understood that what you are experiencing is not a defect, but a desperate biological defense mechanism. You are not a sociopath in hiding. You are an unchecked empath suffering from a systemic override. If you learn to understand this mechanism, if you learn to control this switch rather than letting it control you, this coldness becomes your greatest asset. It transforms from a source of shame into a sophisticated tool of perception. You can become the untouchable observer. Someone who can heal others without bleeding out, someone who can understand the deepest chaos of human nature while remaining perfectly still. But to get there, we must first walk into the basement of your psyche and look at the machinery that is currently overheating. Let us look at this through the lens of what I call the Neuro-Jungian bridge. Jung famously spoke of the participation mystique, a state where a person does not feel distinct from their environment. In ancient times, this was how we survived. We felt the tribe's fear, the tribe's hunger. Today, we call this the activity of mirror neurons. Your brain is hardwired with a hyperactive network of these neurons that fire not only when you perform an action, but when you watch someone else perform it. When someone cries, your brain lights up as if you are crying. When someone is angry, your cortisol spikes as if you are in the fight. You are not just observing reality, you are metabolizing it. Most people have a natural filter, a thick skin that blocks out 80% of this emotional data. But you? You were born without skin. You are walking through a field of radiation in a t-shirt. You absorb the anxiety of your boss, the unspoken sadness of your partner, the frantic energy of the stranger on the subway. You are constantly running a background simulation of everyone else's internal state. This is your genius. It is why people are drawn to you. They feel felt by you. But this genius comes with a devastating tax: compassion bankruptcy. The human brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, is an energy-expensive organ. It consumes 20% of your body's calories. When you are in a state of hyper-empathy, processing the emotional data of everyone around you, you are burning through your cognitive fuel at an accelerated rate. Jung observed that the psyche is a self-regulating system, much like the body's temperature. If you get too hot, you sweat. If you get too cold, you shiver. If you give too much, the psyche forces you to take. When you hit that wall at the party, or during that long phone call, your brain detects a critical energy failure. It realizes you are approaching a zone of danger where you will no longer have the resources to keep your own heart beating or your own mind functioning. So, It pulls the emergency brake. It initiates the empath's circuit breaker. This is why the detachment feels so violent and sudden. It has to be. Your nervous system is slamming the door shut to prevent a total collapse. It severs the connection to the outside world to preserve the integrity of the internal world. The numbness you feel is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of a protective shield. It is your psyche saying, "No more." However, because you do not understand this as a biological and psychological necessity, you misinterpret it. You look at your own coldness and you judge it through the lens of morality. You think, a good person wouldn't feel this annoyance. You think, a loving mother wouldn't want to run away from her children. Jung warned us that when we repress or misunderstand a natural part of ourselves, it grows darker and denser in the unconscious. By fearing your own coldness, you are actually making it dangerous. You are turning a temporary safety measure into a permanent identity. You start to believe the lie that you are incapable of connection, so you begin to withdraw before you even try. You start building the wall higher and thicker, not just when you are tired, but all the time. This is the trap. This is where the empath risks falling into the very real darkness of isolation, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know how to stop the bleeding. Consider the archetype of the wounded healer. Jung saw this figure often, the person who has the intuitive gift to see into the souls of others, yet cannot tend to their own wounds. In your life, this manifests as a cruel irony. You are the therapist for your friends, the mediator for your family, the confessor for strangers. You offer them profound understanding, but who understands you? Who holds the container for the one who holds everyone else? This asymmetry creates a profound, secret loneliness. You are surrounded by people who love you, yet you feel completely unseen. They love the warmth you provide, the light you shine on them, but they do not see the fuel it costs to keep that light burning. And when the fuel runs out and you go dark, they look at you with confusion, sometimes even betrayal. "What's wrong?" they ask. "You've changed." You haven't changed. You have just collapsed, and in that collapse, you retreat into a fortress of solitude, a place where no new demands can be made of you. In this state, you might find yourself doom-scrolling for hours, staring into space, or binge-watching shows you don't even like, just to drown out the noise of your own intuition. This is what we call dissociative rest. It is a coma for the soul, induced to recover from the trauma of being wide open in a harsh world. But there is a path out of this cycle of exhaustion and guilt. It requires a radical shift in how you view your own sensitivity. It requires you to stop trying to be a saint and start learning to be a guardian. Jung believed that the goal of life was not perfection, but wholeness. Wholeness includes the coldness. Wholeness includes the ability to say no without apology. Wholeness means integrating the ruthless protector that lives inside you, the part of you that knows exactly when to cut the cord. Let's look at a specific dynamic that likely plays out in your life. Perhaps you have a friend or family member. Let's call him the crisis architect. This is someone whose life is perpetually in flames, and they always come to you for the water. You listen, you advise, you absorb their panic. You metabolize their pain so they don't have to feel it. They leave the conversation feeling lighter, unburdened, fixed. They walk away with a spring in their step. And you? You walk away feeling heavy, sick and clouded. You have essentially performed a psychic blood transfusion. You gave them your vitality and took their toxicity. Jung would argue that this is not actually kindness. It is a form of unconscious merging that hurts both parties. By carrying their burden, you prevent them from developing their own strength. And by letting them drain you, you destroy the instrument, yourself, that is meant to help them. This is where the loneliness deepens. You feel used, But you also feel unable to stop, because your identity is wrapped up in being the good one, the strong one, the one who understands. This brings us to the edge of the precipice. To reclaim your genius, to move from a frantic empath to a powerful observer, you must be willing to do something that feels completely counterintuitive. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to let people sit in their own mess, even when you know exactly how to clean it up. You must learn to witness suffering without eating it. Consider the case of a man we will call Heinrich. Heinrich was not a soldier or a king. He was a quiet man, a local teacher who was revered for his patience. In his village, he was the unofficial confessor. Students came to him with their fears of failure, parents with their marital grievances, neighbors with their petty disputes. Heinrich never turned anyone away. He offered a soft gaze and a listening ear, year after year. He was the vessel for the village's anxiety. Then, quite suddenly, Heinrich changed. During a meeting with a distraught mother who was weeping over her son's grades, Heinrich felt a strange sensation in his chest, not of pity, but of revulsion. He looked at her tears and saw only water. He listened to her voice and heard only noise. He stood up, interrupted her mid-sentence, and walked out of the room, leaving her stunned. He went home, locked his door, and refused to speak to anyone for weeks. When he finally sought help, he was terrified. He confessed to Jung that he had lost his soul. He believed he had become possessed by a demon of indifference. He waited for Jung to scold him, to tell him to pray for his empathy to return. But Jung did not scold him. He looked at Heinrich and smiled. He told him that the demon was actually a savior. Heinrich's psyche had recognized that he was drowning, so it built a raft. The coldness was the raft. By walking out of that room, Heinrich had performed the first act of self-preservation in his life. He hadn't lost his soul. He had finally retrieved it from the custody of everyone else. Perhaps you are like Heinrich. You have spent so many years being the good listener, the reliable one, the fixer, that you have forgotten that you exist as a separate entity. You have defined your worth entirely by how much you can endure for others. And now that your body is forcing you to stop, you feel like a failure. You look at your partner or your friend crying, and you feel a flash of irritation instead of love, and then you hate yourself for it. You think, I am broken. But listen closely. That irritation is not malice. It is a boundary trying to assert itself in a system that has no gates. It is your nervous system screaming, "Space! I need space!" If you recognize this specific cycle, this swing from intense caring to sudden icy detachment, I want you to pause for a moment. This is a crucial realization. Take a second to ground yourself in this truth. If you are brave enough to admit that you have felt this forbidden coldness, comment, "I am listening," below. Acknowledging this shadow is the first step to integrating it. To master this dynamic, we must move beyond the guilt and look at the mechanics. We need to dissect the anatomy of your burnout so you can catch it before the crash. Jungian psychology, combined with what we now know about neurobiology, allows us to map this process into 3 distinct stages. You likely cycle through these every week, perhaps even every day. The first stage is the porous boundary. This is your default state. In this mode, your mirror neurons are firing without inhibition. You walk into a room and you don't just see the atmosphere, you inhale it. If the room is tense, your muscles tighten. If someone is sad, your dopamine drops. You are not observing the world, you are being infected by it. In this stage, you feel useful, connected, and good. But you are bleeding energy. You are spending a currency you do not have. This leads inevitably to the second stage, the cortisol flood. This is the saturation point. Your brain, specifically the amygdala, The alarm bell of the psyche realizes that you are carrying more emotional weight than your system can handle. It perceives this emotional overload as a physical threat, indistinguishable from being chased by a predator. So, it dumps stress hormones into your blood. You might feel a sudden spike of anxiety, a racing heart, or an unexplainable urge to physically run away. This is the moment you usually ignore. You push through. You tell yourself, just one more hour, or I can't leave them now. And because you ignore the alarm, your brain initiates the final, most drastic stage, the emotional firewall. This is the detached state. To save the organism, your brain inhibits the limbic system, the emotional center. It literally numbs you. This is why you can stare at a crying person and feel nothing. It is a biological override. The empathy is not gone, it is offline. It is in a medically induced coma. The danger here is not the firewall itself, the danger is getting stuck behind it. Many empaths, terrified of the pain of stage 1, eventually decide to live in stage 3 permanently. They become cynics. They become isolated. They decide that because people are draining, people must be avoided entirely. They retreat into a fortress of intellect and logic, analyzing life but never touching it. They become the frozen one. They are safe, yes, but they are also dead inside. They have cut off the very connection that gives their life meaning. But there is a fourth option. There is a stage beyond the firewall. It is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a true individual who is neither a slave to the crowd's emotions nor a hermit hiding from them. This is the state of the conscious observer. In this state, you do not build a wall to keep people out. You build a filter. You learn to stand in the presence of someone else's pain, to see it clearly, to understand it deeply, but to refuse to let it enter your bloodstream. You learn to distinguish between empathy, feeling with someone, and compassion, feeling for someone. Empathy is, you are drowning, so I will jump in the water and drown with you so you aren't alone. Compassion is, I see you are drowning, I will stand firmly on the shore and throw you a rope. The difference is life and death. But how do you build this filter? How do you override a lifetime of conditioning that tells you that feeling it all is the only way to love? The answer lies in a specific psychological technique that Jung hinted at, a way of training your mind to visualize a boundary that is transparent but impenetrable. It requires you to make a shift in your internal language, to change the way you speak to yourself when the wave of emotion hits. This shift begins with a technique I call cognitive decoupling. It is a method of intervening in the split second before your mirror neurons hijack your nervous system. Usually, when you encounter someone's heavy emotion, let's say deep grief, your internal monologue instantly says, "I am so sad." You identify with the feeling, you claim it, it becomes yours. To break the cycle, you must change the syntax of your thoughts. You must train yourself to say, I perceive sadness. It sounds subtle, but to your brain, the difference is tectonic. I am sad is a command to your limbic system to produce the chemistry of sorrow. I perceive sadness is a report from your prefrontal cortex. It keeps the data in the analytical part of your brain, preventing it from flooding the emotional core. You acknowledge the reality of the pain, but you refuse to sign the contract of ownership. Imagine a mirror. When you hold a mirror up to a raging fire, the mirror reflects the flames perfectly. It shows the heat, the color, the intensity. But the mirror itself does not burn. It remains cool glass. For your entire life, you have been acting like a sponge, soaking up the water until you drown. Now, you must become the mirror. You must reflect the other person's state back to them so they can see it, without becoming the state yourself. This is the true application of Jung's concept of the observer self. When you practice this, something miraculous happens. You stop needing to run away. You stop needing to go cold. Because you are no longer under threat of being consumed, you can actually stay present. You can look at the crisis architect in your life and listen to their problems with absolute clarity. You can offer them wisdom that comes from a place of stability rather than a place of shared panic. You become the eye of the storm, the only still point in a turning world. This is the genius that was promised to you. The secret loneliness you have felt all these years was simply the training ground for this mastery. You felt lonely because you were different, and you were different because you were designed for a specific function. You were designed to be a navigator of the unconscious. The world is filled with people who are completely deaf to the undertones of reality. They crash into each other, oblivious to the emotional currents driving their behavior. They need you. They need your ability to sense the invisible, to read the room, to anticipate the storm before it breaks. But they need you to be a lighthouse, not a shipwreck. A lighthouse stands on the rocks. It does not jump into the waves. So, the next time you feel that familiar tug, that slide into exhaustion, or that sudden snap of coldness, do not judge yourself. Do not spiral into shame. Recognize it as a signal from your deep self. It is your psyche reminding you that you have dropped the mirror and picked up the sponge. Take a breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Engage your physical senses to ground your nervous system. Visualize that glass wall sliding into place. It is not a wall of indifference, it is a wall of discernment. Look at the person in front of you and silently say, "I see your pain, and I honor it, but I leave it with you." By doing this, you give them the dignity of their own struggle, and you give yourself the right to your own peace. You are not a monster for having limits. You are not broken for needing silence. You are a vessel of high-voltage consciousness, learning how to handle the current without burning out the wires. The coldness you feared was just your power trying to survive. Now that you understand it, you no longer need to fear it. You can wield it. You can turn the temperature down when the world gets too hot, and you can warm it up when you are safe. You are in control of the switch. Your sensitivity is not a mistake. It is the evolution of human connection. But like any evolution, it requires a new way of being to sustain it. Walk forward, not as a martyr, but as a master. See you in the next dimension.